What if one commercial just changed the power structure of women's basketball forever? Because that's exactly what people started whispering the moment Caitlin Clark's Nike ad dropped. Not because it looked good, not because it was polished, but because of what happened after it went live. Within hours, it became impossible to ignore. Players noticed, brands noticed, and some people realized a gap had just been exposed that might never close again. And the most uncomfortable part? This wasn't supposed to happen like this. By the end of day 1, people were already raising eyebrows. By day 2, there was no denying it. Over 30 million views in under 48 hours, just on Nike's Instagram. That number matters more than people want to admit. Because Nike doesn't struggle for attention. They post elite athletes constantly. Championship teams, Olympic icons, global superstars. Most of those posts don't even sniff numbers like this. This wasn't good engagement. It was an outlier. And when analysts started lining it up next to Nike's other viral moments, the comparison got uncomfortable fast. Clark's ad wasn't being compared to other WNBA campaigns. It was being measured against World Series celebrations and international soccer moments. That's when the whispers started. Because once a player reaches that level, they're no longer competing inside their sport. They're competing with culture itself. And Caitlin Clark didn't climb there slowly. She jumped. But the views weren't even the most unsettling part. A lot of content racks up numbers because it's forced in front of people. This wasn't that. People weren't just scrolling past it. They were replaying it, sharing it, arguing about it, sending it to friends who don't even follow basketball. That's how you know something crossed over. And here's what made players nervous. Those views weren't passive. They weren't inflated by controversy or outrage. They were fueled by curiosity and belief. People wanted to see her prove it. Again, that kind of attention doesn't fade easily. It sticks. And once brands see it translate into real engagement, the equation changes overnight. But the real wake-up call came when people realized this was only the beginning of the rollout. Nike knows how to manufacture hype. That's not up for debate. But this ad didn't feel manufactured. It felt restrained. No dramatic speeches. No forced empowerment slogans. No overproduced chaos. Just a simple challenge layered with doubt and the quiet confidence that she'd answer it. That's what pulled people in. Because the ad didn't scream for attention. It let disbelief do the work. And disbelief is addictive. Every line was designed to question her, not insult her, not praise her, just test her. And every time, she answered without explaining herself. That's rare. Most athlete ads try to convince you why someone matters. This one assumed you'd figure it out on your own. And that's exactly why it reached people who don't care about box scores, records, or rankings. They weren't watching a basketball ad. They were watching a moment. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Caitlin Clark isn't loud online. She isn't constantly chasing attention. She doesn't flood social media with content. And yet, one controlled release from Nike outperformed entire campaigns built around multiple athletes. That's when the conversation shifted from marketing skill to market demand. Because when someone with less online presence generates more attention, it exposes something uncomfortable. It means people aren't following out of obligation. They're following because they actually care. And once brands recognize that difference, loyalty shifts fast. This ad didn't just elevate Caitlin Clark. It quietly reset expectations. And the moment those expectations reset, everyone else had to ask themselves the same question. If this is what one player can do with a single ad, what happens when the season starts? And that realization is where the real pressure began to form. The comparison didn't start in headlines. It started quietly, side-by-side screenshots, short clips stitched together, comments that didn't even tag anyone directly. People weren't trying to attack Aya Wilson. They were trying to understand the difference. And the more they looked, the harder it became to ignore. Caitlin Clark's ad felt intentional, thought through, built around tension and disbelief. Aya's felt functional, like something checked off a list. That contrast alone might have passed quietly. But then one word started repeating itself. Not shouted, not forced, just casually dropped. Lazy. Once that word stuck, the conversation shifted from marketing quality to perceived value. Because when fans label something lazy, they're not just criticizing effort. They're questioning how much someone mattered in the room where decisions were made. And that's when the situation became volatile. Nike never intended to pit players against each other. But intention doesn't matter once perception sets in. By saying nothing, Nike allowed the story to write itself. And the story fans wrote was simple. Some players get belief, others get placeholders. That idea spread fast. It wasn't about skill. It wasn't about championships. It was about trust. Who does the brand trust to carry culture? Who do they trust to justify a massive bet? And every time that question came up, Caitlin Clark's name floated to the top. Not because she demanded it, but because the results made it impossible to argue otherwise. Here's the part no one likes to confront. Online support is cheap. Likes cost nothing. Comments cost nothing. Arguments cost nothing. But viewership? That requires time, attention, commitment. When Caitlin Clark plays, people rearrange their schedules. They tune in early. They stay through timeouts. That's not normal fandom behavior. That's investment. And when she doesn't play, the drop-off is immediate. You can't explain that away. You can't spin it. You can't claim bias when the numbers move that cleanly. That's when executives stop listening to noise and start listening to data. For a long time, critics said Caitlin Clark was a media creation, a hype cycle, a moment inflated by exposure. This ad dismantled that theory in real time. Hype doesn't sustain curiosity. Exposure doesn't force people to care. You can't manufacture tens of millions of genuine interactions without underlying demand. This wasn't media pushing her forward. This was the audience pulling her closer. And that distinction matters more than any accolade. Because once fans prove they'll follow someone anywhere, commercials, broadcasts, platforms, brands stop asking if they should invest. They start asking how fast. Nike didn't roll this out casually. They couldn't afford to. The brand has been chasing momentum in a crowded market where attention shifts faster than loyalty. They needed something that didn't just perform. It needed to cut through everything else. Caitlin Clark gave them that chance. This wasn't about women's basketball alone. It was about relevance, about recapturing cultural dominance. And when a brand like Nike finds someone who can move numbers like this, hesitation disappears. That's why the campaign felt different. Sharper, cleaner, more confident. It wasn't experimental. It was decisive. Other players noticed immediately. Not because they're jealous, but because they're professionals who understand what resources look like. Some players are given space to fail. Others aren't given space to try. When one athlete gets a campaign that dominates culture, while others get releases that barely ripple, it creates an unspoken hierarchy. No meetings needed. No announcements made. Everyone understands where they stand. And that understanding is heavy. Publicly, the league emphasizes unity, growth, shared progress. Privately, this moment cracked the surface. Because one player generating an outsized portion of economic value changes every negotiation, every discussion, every long-term plan. It raises questions no one wants to ask out loud. How do you balance collective progress when individual impact is this uneven? How do you argue equality when markets don't behave equally? Those questions don't disappear. They linger. Caitlin Clark didn't ask to become this dividing line. She didn't position herself as competition for her peers. She didn't provoke comparisons or chase spotlight. She just kept performing. And the market responded. That's what makes this so uncomfortable. There's no villain. No sabotage. No scandal. Just cause and effect. And once cause and effect become visible, denial stops working. Because the league isn't watching potential anymore. It's watching reality take shape. Here's what most people completely overlooked. Nike didn't build this campaign to stop at American timelines. From the messaging to the pacing, everything about Caitlin Clark's rollout was designed to travel. No heavy league references. No inside jokes. No niche language. Just belief, doubt, and proof. That's global language. When Clark talked about visiting places like China to inspire young athletes, it wasn't a casual comment. It was a signal. Nike doesn't send athletes overseas to inspire, unless there's a larger plan attached. They're positioning her as an export. Not just a WNBA star, but a face that can represent women's basketball everywhere. And that changes the scale of this entire conversation. Because once an athlete becomes internationally recognizable, they stop competing locally. They start competing with icons. This is where the separation becomes impossible to ignore. Most players are still fighting for national relevance. Media coverage, consistent recognition, stable endorsement deals. Caitlin Clark is already being framed as a global ambassador. That's a different tier entirely. International recognition opens doors that domestic success never will. Overseas partnerships, global campaigns, long-term brand equity that outlives playing careers. And the harsh truth is this: once someone reaches that level, others don't catch up by working harder. They catch up only if the market decides it wants them to. And right now, the market has made its choice very clear. The excitement around the ad created something else Nike can't escape now: expectation. When you generate this much attention before a product even exists, you raise the bar to an uncomfortable height. This shoe can't just sell well. It has to dominate. Anything less will be framed as disappointment. That's the risk Nike knowingly took. Because if the shoe delivers, if it sells out instantly, if it pushes into nine-figure territory, like some analysts believe, it won't just validate Caitlin Clark. It will rewrite the economics of women's sports endorsements. And if it doesn't, the backlash will be loud. Nike understands something most people don't. You don't get moments like this often. When an athlete pulls this much attention organically, you don't slow down to play it safe. You lean in, because even failure at this scale still keeps you relevant. But success? Success locks history in place. That's why this rollout felt aggressive. Why it felt confident. Why it felt like Nike wasn't asking permission anymore. They weren't testing Caitlin Clark. They were betting on her. The slogan didn't just describe her shooting range. It described her origin. A driveway in Iowa. A small market. No traditional pipeline. That's why the message resonated. It wasn't telling people to dream big. It was showing them that geography doesn't decide relevance anymore. And that idea hits harder than any highlight reel. Because it makes fans feel like they're part of the story. Like success isn't reserved for a select few cities or systems. Nike didn't just sell shoes with that message. They sold access. Here's the part other players can't replicate. You can't manufacture authenticity after the fact. Caitlin Clark's story works because it's real. Because it wasn't built in a boardroom. Because it existed long before the branding caught up. Other athletes can adopt similar slogans, but without the same backstory, it rings hollow. That's what makes this moment dangerous for the rest of the league. You can't recreate lightning by mimicking the storm. This rollout quietly established something new. A tier above stars. Caitlin Clark isn't just the face of women's basketball right now. She's the entry point for people who've never cared about it before. That's power. Once you become the gateway, everything flows through you. Media coverage, sponsorship budgets, narrative focus. And when one athlete becomes the gateway, everyone else becomes optional. That's not opinion. That's how markets behave. This wasn't hype. It wasn't timing. It wasn't luck. It was alignment, talent, narrative, demand, and opportunity colliding at once. And moments like that don't rewind. Even if Caitlin Clark never reaches the same cultural peak again, the floor has permanently risen. Her decline still exists above everyone else's ceiling. And that's what makes this terrifying for rivals. They're not chasing her best year. They're chasing her baseline. Caitlin Clark isn't trying to outshine anyone. She's not manufacturing drama. She's not chasing comparisons. She's not positioning herself against her peers. She's just playing basketball and saying yes to opportunities. And the market is doing the rest. That's the most uncomfortable truth of all. Because you can't fight it. You can't protest it. You can't cancel it. You can only respond to it. This moment didn't just elevate one player. It forced the league to confront a reality it's been circling for years. Women's basketball doesn't grow evenly. It grows through gravity. Attention clusters around the people who pull viewers in, not the people who deserve it on paper. And Caitlin Clark has become that gravitational center. That changes everything: scheduling, broadcasting priorities, marketing decisions, even how new stars are introduced. The league can talk about balance all at once. The market doesn't care. It follows momentum. Some people want to believe this is a moment that will pass. That once the hype cools, things will even out. But moments like this don't fade. They rewire expectations. Broadcasters now know what spikes ratings. Sponsors now know what drives clicks. Fans now know who makes games feel must-watch. Once that knowledge exists, it doesn't disappear. And every season moving forward will be shaped by it. This moment hits a nerve because it challenges something people desperately want to believe. That hard work guarantees visibility. That excellence eventually gets rewarded evenly. That the system, over time, balances itself out. Caitlin Clark's rise puts all of that under a harsh light. Because when one player pulls this far ahead, it forces an uncomfortable question. Not about talent, but about attention. And attention has never played fair. This is where the conversation starts to fracture. There's a difference between being respected and being demanded, between being admired and being necessary. Many players are respected. They're celebrated by peers. They're praised by analysts. They're defended fiercely online. But demand is different. Demand shows up in ratings. Demand shows up in ticket sales. Demand shows up when people make time. And Caitlin Clark has crossed into that territory. Not because she was chosen, but because people chose her. That distinction makes this hard to swallow. For other players, this isn't theoretical. It's personal. They've trained just as long, sacrificed just as much, played through injuries, carried the league when cameras were scarce and sponsors were hesitant. They did everything they were told would matter. And now they're being asked to accept that one player commands a level of attention they may never reach, no matter how accomplished they are. That realization stings. Not because it's unfair, but because it's indifferent. The market doesn't punish effort. It simply ignores it. That's why this moment has produced so much tension. Not anger, defensiveness. Because when attention concentrates this dramatically, it feels like something is being taken away. Like space is shrinking. Like opportunities are closing. And when people feel boxed out, they don't argue the data, they argue the narrative. They question hype. They question motives. They question fairness. That's not bitterness. That's survival. Here's the quiet truth underneath all of it. Caitlin Clark's success doesn't diminish anyone else's legacy. But it does force the league to admit that visibility isn't shared. It's earned and amplified unevenly. And once that imbalance becomes visible, pretending otherwise feels dishonest. That's why this moment is so emotionally charged. It doesn't attack greatness. It exposes scarcity. Accepting this reality means letting go of comforting ideas. That if you just keep grinding, attention will come. That time alone guarantees recognition. That growth lifts everyone at the same rate. Those ideas feel good. But they aren't how culture moves. Culture follows momentum. Momentum follows emotion. And emotion follows connection. That chain doesn't respond to fairness. That's why this moment feels heavier than a highlight or a headline. It forces players, fans, and the league itself to confront something deeply uncomfortable. Not everyone who deserves attention will get it. And Caitlin Clark's rise made that impossible to ignore. What made this moment different wasn't how loud it was. It was how final it felt. Sports are full of hype cycles. Players rise, players cool off, narratives reset. Everyone is used to that rhythm. But this didn't feel like a spike that would level out. It felt like a line being crossed. Once Caitlin Clark's Nike had landed the way it did, there was no realistic path back to normal. Because normal depends on doubt. And doubt disappeared. Before this moment, Caitlin Clark was framed as potential. A rising star. A big draw. A promising investment. After this moment, she became an assumption. Brands stopped asking if she could carry attention. They started planning around the idea that she would. Broadcasters didn't wonder whether her games would perform. They expected it. That shift is subtle, but it's everything. Potential invites debate. Assumption ends it. And once someone becomes an assumption, the entire ecosystem adjusts around them. This is where things quietly locked into place. Schedules get built differently. Campaigns get timed differently. Budgets get allocated differently. Not because anyone announced a change, but because the data made the decision unavoidable. And when systems adjust quietly, they don't reverse easily. That's why this moment feels permanent. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just structurally real. The league didn't crown Caitlin Clark. The audience did. For other players, this is the hardest part to process. Not that Caitlin Clark succeeded, but that her success reset the reference point. What used to be considered a strong campaign now looks small. What once felt like momentum now feels insufficient. The bar didn't rise evenly, it jumped. And when the bar jumps, not everyone clears it. That creates pressure that has nothing to do with effort and everything to do with timing. Which is why this moment isn't inspiring for everyone. For some, it's suffocating. Caitlin Clark didn't ask to carry this weight. But once a player becomes the benchmark, everything they do gets amplified. Every endorsement is scrutinized. Every performance is magnified. Every absence feels louder. That's the cost of becoming the reference point. You don't just represent yourself anymore. You represent the league's visibility, its momentum, and its credibility. And whether she wants that responsibility or not, it's hers now. There are moments you can walk back. This isn't one of them. Because once audiences decide someone is must-watch, they don't undecide it easily. They may drift, but the baseline stays elevated. Even decline happens from a higher floor. That's what makes this moment irreversible. Not because Caitlin Clark will always dominate, but because she permanently changed what dominance looks like. So here's the question that refuses to go away. Is Caitlin Clark a rare exception? Or is she the first clear example of what women's basketball has been waiting for? Because those two possibilities lead to very different futures. If she's an outlier, then this moment becomes a legend. A spike that never quite gets replicated. A story people tell years from now about the season when everything aligned just right for one player. But if she's the blueprint, then this isn't a peak, it's a beginning. It means the sport has finally crossed a threshold where one player can pull in mainstream attention without needing controversy, outrage, or forced narratives. It means skill, confidence, and authenticity are enough to break through on their own. And that realization is unsettling, because it suggests the ceiling everyone assumed existed never really did. If Caitlin Clark is the blueprint, then the league has to ask harder questions. Not about fairness, not about effort, but about connection. Why do some players generate loyalty while others generate debate? Why do some moments feel essential while others feel optional? Those answers don't live in stat sheets. They live in emotion. And emotion is unpredictable. It can't be coached. It can't be evenly distributed. It chooses who it chooses. That's why this moment feels so disruptive. Because it forces everyone to confront something that can't be managed or controlled. The audience doesn't follow instructions. It follows interest. If this is the blueprint, future stars won't just be measured by performance. They'll be measured by gravity. Who pulls viewers in? Who creates anticipation? Who makes people care enough to show up? That changes development paths. Media strategy. Even how young players imagine success. And it raises an uncomfortable possibility. Not everyone will benefit equally from growth. Because growth always concentrates first. Caitlin Clark didn't campaign for this role. She didn't position herself as a disruptor. She didn't ask to become a dividing line. She simply showed up, and the audience followed. That's the part no one can argue with. Because markets don't respond to narratives. They respond to behavior. And the behavior here was undeniable. People watched. People shared. People cared. That's the clearest signal there is. Years from now, this moment won't be remembered as just a viral ad. It'll be remembered as the point where attention stopped being theoretical and became measurable. Where women's basketball didn't just ask for interest. It commanded it through one undeniable figure. Not because she was perfect, but because she was compelling. And compelling always wins. This wasn't hype. It wasn't favoritism. It wasn't luck. It was alignment. And once alignment happens at this scale, there's no pretending it didn't. The market has spoken. The only question now is who learns from it and who gets left behind. And if you want more stories like this, the real dynamics behind sports, culture, and power that most people won't say out loud, make sure you're subscribed. Because moments like this don't happen often. But when they do, we're going to break them down exactly like this. You don't want to miss what comes next.